Welcome to this deep dive on the anxious generation. It's by Jonathan Haidt. You sent this one in, and it's a really fascinating look at why Gen Z seems to be struggling maybe a bit more than other generations when it comes to mental health. So we're going to, really unpack his theories, the research, and then, what it all means, especially for you listening.
And what's really interesting here is that Haidt doesn't just point the finger at, the easy target, right? Like social media, he actually, he takes this much wider view. He even compares, get this, today's childhood to being raised on Mars.
Right, that whole Mars generation thing.
Yeah.
And I'll admit, at first I was like, okay, is this a sci-fi book? But it really does highlight just how different things are for kids today.
Absolutely. So think about it, right? Kids growing up on Mars, totally alien environment compared to what we're used to as humans.
Yeah.
And Haidt's argument is that in a lot of ways, childhood today is just as drastically different compared to just like 1 or 2 generations ago. Think about it. The internet, smartphones being so common, social media, it's a whole new world.
It really is. And Gen Z is the first to fully grow up in that world. I remember dial-up. It's not like that for them at all. They're digital natives. But it sounds like Haidt's saying there's a cost to that.
Yeah, and he doesn't shy away from it. He lays out, some pretty startling data. We're talking about higher rates of depression, anxiety, self-harm, all significantly higher in Gen Z versus millennials. And the timing here is really important because, it's not just about things like global recessions or, global terrorism, things that millennials also live through. This spike is specifically tied to, birth year. It's those born after 1996.
There's that graph, right? In the book, it shows teen depression just shooting up around 2012. It's stark.
Exactly. And if you think about what else was going on in 2012, it's kind of, smartphones were everywhere by then. Social media, especially Instagram, was blowing up.
Oh, 100%. It's like the iPhone 4, that was 2010. It had that front-facing camera. And then Instagram, like you said, 2012. It changed everything, especially for teenage girls. Suddenly it's all about selfies and how you look online, and that's a lot of pressure.
Intense is a good word for it. And Haidt's argument is that this constant comparison, this pressure to, present this perfect self-image online, that it takes a toll. It really does impact mental health. But there's this other piece too, right? It's like this other big shift that makes this whole thing even more complicated, and he calls it the Great Rewiring.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that. What is the Great Rewiring?
So you've got these massive technological changes happening, right? But Haidt also points to this other change that's, I think, a little less obvious. It's this decline in what he calls free play. Since, the 80s, the 90s, kids are just way more supervised. Their time is much more scheduled. And frankly, they're just plugged into devices more. So they're missing out on these unstructured experiences that I think previous generations just, took for granted.
It's so true. I can remember spending hours at the playground, no adults, just figuring things out with my friends. Haidt actually talks about how playgrounds themselves have changed, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, he does. And it's true. Playgrounds now are a lot safer, but they're also a lot less challenging. Fewer opportunities for risk-taking, for kids to just, figure things out for themselves. And so Haidt's point is that this decline in free play, coupled with the constant stimulation from devices, it disrupts the way our brains are kind of naturally wired to develop.
And that's where that whole concept of anti-fragility comes in, right?
Right. And this might sound kind of counterintuitive, but so he explains that we are designed, much like our immune systems, to actually get stronger through challenges.
So it's like facing obstacles, learning to overcome them, that actually builds resilience.
Exactly. He gives us this example. Trees actually need wind to grow strong. If you shelter a tree too much, it becomes, brittle and it breaks really easily. And he applies that same principle to, children's social and emotional development. It's like navigating the challenges of free play, whether it's conflict with other kids or assessing risk or even just dealing with boredom. All those things help develop really crucial life skills. And when kids are constantly plugged in, they just miss out on those opportunities to build that anti-fragility.
So we've got less opportunity to develop resilience through play and the rise of social media right at those critical ages. Mm-hmm. What's the impact of that 1-2 punch is we're, sending them to Mars, like he's saying, but without any of the tools or the resilience they need to actually handle it.
Yeah, without the spacesuits, without the training. And then on top of that, right, you've got the whole brains on social media thing. And again, it's not just about the content, but the design of it all, you know?
Right. It's they were built to be engaging, but not necessarily healthy, especially for developing brains.
Exactly. So you've got that constant comparison, especially for girls, with all these idealized images everywhere. And then you throw in, those reward systems, those algorithms. It's all about that dopamine hit that keeps you scrolling. And Haidt argues that that creates like a perfect storm for anxiety, for depression, especially at those ages.
Because it's almost like it's wiring their brains for like instant gratification, validation, which is not exactly how the real world works.
Right, exactly.
But what about the boys, though? Because you mentioned social media affects girls differently, right? So what does Haidt say about what's unique to boys in this whole digital landscape?
Yeah, this is where that Mars generation thing, the analogy, it gets almost even more relevant, I mean, imagine being a young boy on Mars, right? Trying to figure out like masculinity, relationships, but with very limited real world experience.
Right.
And one of the things that Haidt really highlights is the easy access to hardcore pornography now. And, this is happening during these super crucial developmental years, right? When, boys are forming their understanding of sex, relationships, everything.
Yeah, it's a whole different level of exposure than like previous generations, that's for sure. And makes you wonder, how does that impact like their expectations, their perceptions down the line?
Totally, yeah. Totally uncharted territory.
Yeah.
Now, with video games, which, let's be honest, take up a lot of young boys' time, Haidt's findings are a little more, I guess, nuanced.
So it's not all doom and gloom with gaming.
Right. So while games can definitely be addictive for some, the evidence of like direct harm isn't as strong as it is with social media. It seems like the key thing there is the displacement of real world interaction. So if gaming is replacing, face-to-face time with friends, that's where it can become a problem.
Right. So it's about finding that balance again.
Yeah.
Right. Just like with, I don't know, like anything else. But Haidt goes even deeper than this, right? Like he even connects all this digital saturation to like a loss of spirituality.
He does. And it's a fascinating connection he makes. He argues that constantly being plugged in disrupts the things that foster a sense of the sacred, of something larger than ourselves.
Give me an example. Like what kind of things are we talking about there?
Well, think about it. The online world, it's all stimulation all the time, right? It doesn't exactly encourage self-reflection, and it's pretty hard to like connect with something bigger than yourself when you're constantly being bombarded with, notifications and updates. Remember that Martian environment we were talking about?
It's loud, it's distracting.
Exactly. It's really hard to find a quiet moment to think.
And appreciate the world around us too.
Yeah.
It's like we've traded sunsets for screen time.
100%. And the online world, it doesn't like distinguish between the sacred and the, the profane. It's all mashed together. Traditional societies had rituals, sacred spaces, things that really instilled a sense of reverence. The digital world, it kind of, it blurs all those boundaries, and Haidt suggests that contributes to this feeling of anxiety, disconnect, this lack of meaning that he talks about.
Okay, so we've got the decline of free play, the rise of tech that's constantly vying for our attention, and now this sense that, the sacred is kind of fading into the background. I mean, it's a pretty bleak picture, right?
Yeah. But
Haidt doesn't just leave us there, does he? He offers some solutions.
He does, yeah. And this is where things get, I think, really interesting, because he doesn't just, diagnose the problem. He actually tries to offer a path forward. And it's not just about, limiting screen time, although that is part of it. But he actually suggests solutions on like multiple levels, starting with the government and tech companies.
Okay, so this is a systemic issue that requires systemic change.
Exactly. He's talking about big picture things like age verification for social media platforms, a duty of care from tech companies to protect young users. He even talks about limiting addictive design features.
Those endless scrolling feeds and things like that.
Exactly. Like that's by design, But it's not just on the tech companies. Haidt also talks about the role that schools can play.
Like banning phones altogether.
That's one option. And he does talk about schools that have gone phone-free, and they've seen some positive results. Kids are more focused, there are fewer distractions, they even seem happier. But he also talks about incorporating, more unstructured playtime into the school day, which goes back to that whole anti-fragility thing we were talking about. And he really likes programs like the Let Grow Project, which encourages schools to give kids more independence challenges.
Oh, yeah. The Let Grow Project, I've heard of that. That's all about letting kids do things on their own, right? Like walk to the park by themselves or stay home alone.
Exactly. Things that, again, previous generations did without even thinking about it, but now seem kind of radical. It's about counteracting that culture of overprotection and allowing kids to, develop that confidence, that competence.
It all ties back to that Mars generation analogy, right? Like,
Yeah.
we can't keep them in a simulated, controlled environment and then just expect them to thrive when they have to actually, land on Mars.
Exactly. And finally, he offers some really practical advice for parents. And let's face it, this is where a lot of this comes down to.
Okay, so what's the game plan for parents? What does he suggest?
He's a big advocate for delaying smartphones as long as possible, ideally until high school. And then, of course, modeling healthy tech, use ourselves.
Right.
It's hard to preach digital minimalism when we're constantly on our devices.
Right, it's the classic, do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly. Kids see right through that. But it's more than just limiting screens, right? He also talks about the importance of fostering real-world activities. So that could be, sports, hobbies, spending time in nature, anything that kind of counteracts that constant digital stimulation.
Getting those kids off Mars and back to, basic human experiences.
Exactly. It's about giving them those opportunities to build those essential life skills, that resilience that this always-on digital world is kind of eroding.
It does feel like we've covered a lot of ground here.
Mm-hmm.
But I do keep coming back to that stat about mental health issues really spiking around, 2012?
Yeah.
It's compelling, but, is there actually any evidence that these solutions that Haidt's suggesting are actually making a difference?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? And the good news is, yes, he does offer some real-world examples. For instance, he talks about schools that have gone phone-free and have seen, improvements in academic performance, but also in student well-being. Less distraction, more focus, happier kids.
That makes sense. What about some of these other things, like encouraging more free play, giving kids more independence? Is there any proof that stuff actually works?
There is. He cites research showing that free play, just kids being kids, it helps them develop social skills, emotional regulation, resilience. And then there's also a growing body of evidence that giving kids more independence, like those Let Grow project challenges we talked about, it can boost their confidence, give them a sense of, I can do this, I can handle things on my own.
That is encouraging. So it sounds like these aren't just theoretical solutions. They are actually having a positive impact. But let's be real, shifting a whole culture. That's a big task.
It is a huge undertaking, but Haidt is cautiously optimistic. He reminds us that even small changes, multiply across families, schools, communities, can create a ripple effect.
So it's not about feeling like we have to solve everything overnight. It's about taking those small, manageable steps that collectively can make a big difference.
Exactly. And remember, we're talking about equipping an entire generation with the tools they need to navigate a world that's pretty different from the one we grew up in.
It's like giving them a map and a compass before sending them out into that Martian landscape.
I like that analogy. It's about empowering them, not overwhelming them. And that starts with understanding the forces shaping their world, which is what makes this book so important.
Knowledge is power, right? But understanding the problem is just the first step. What kind of parting advice or takeaways does Haidt leave us with? How do we take all of this information and turn it into action?
He reminds us that we can't shield kids from everything, nor should we. That's not how you build resilience. But we can equip them with the skills and resilience they need to navigate the challenges of this new world. He argues that means pushing back against this culture of overprotection that's become so prevalent.
It's about finding that balance between keeping kids safe and letting them experience the world, even with its bumps and bruises.
Exactly. And one of the most thought-provoking ideas Haidt proposes is creating more child-friendly neighborhoods.
What does that look like? Give me a visual.
Imagine neighborhoods where kids can roam freely, play outside unsupervised, and have some of the freedoms that we might have taken for granted growing up. Places where they can explore, take risks, and learn to navigate their world independently.
It sounds almost idyllic, especially in today's hyper-connected, safety-conscious world.
It does, but Haidt believes it's possible. He's not suggesting we go back to the good old days. Those weren't perfect for every kid. But he is challenging us to rethink our priorities, to reimagine what childhood could be, and to ask ourselves, what kind of world are we building for the next generation?
It's a powerful question, and it gets to the heart of why you wanted to deep dive into this book. We can't just shrug our shoulders and accept that this is just how childhood is now. We have responsibility to create a world where kids can not just survive, but truly thrive.
I couldn't agree more. And I think Haidt gives us reason to be hopeful. If we can understand the forces shaping this generation, if we can acknowledge the problems and start taking action, then we can make a difference. It's not about blaming technology or helicopter parenting. It's about understanding the impact of these trends and working together to find solutions.
It's about reclaiming childhood, reclaiming those essential experiences, those opportunities for growth and development that every kid deserves. And it's about remembering that technology, used mindfully, can be a tool for good, not just a source of anxiety and distraction.
Absolutely. This isn't just a Gen Z problem, it's a human problem. It's on all of us to create a healthier, more human-centered world for everyone.
Well said. It's a challenge, no doubt, but I think this deep dive into the anxious generation has given us plenty to think about and, more importantly, plenty to act on. So, to our listener, we hope this has been a valuable use of your time. We encourage you to check out The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt and to continue exploring these crucial questions about the world we're shaping for the next generation.